Hi, everyone. I'm Whitney, the HGA's program coordinator, and you're joining us today for our first installment of Thread Talks, HGA's version of TED Talks. This hour will feature 3 speakers speaking for 15 minutes each. First up, we have Carol James, and she is speaking on Sprang. What is it? How does it work? And what can you make with it? Carol, take it away.
Okay, so let me try to share my screen here. There we go, and share. There we go. So I want to start by saying Happy Fiber Week to everyone, and a big thanks to HGA for this opportunity to share with you a little bit on the subject of Sprang. Now, the technique comes up very frequently in history. Whoops, how come I'm not, there we go. The technique comes up frequently in history, and we see it in Greek and Roman artwork. And actually, there's a fair amount of evidence that Sprang was even earlier than that, dating to the Bronze Age. Sprang was known in Europe. It shows up in artwork here, stained glass windows from the 1300s and a painting from the 1500s. And there are actual pieces of Sprang in existence from the 1500s. Why don't people know more about Sprang today? Well, with the Industrial Revolution and textile factories in the 1800s, skilled weavers had a difficult time making a living, and much textile knowledge was lost, including a familiarity with this technique. I've been exploring Sprang for over 20 years now, trying to reverse engineer diverse garments, including Sprang leggings, and I'm here today to tell you about this technique. We've lost so much of it. We've even lost the word in many languages for this technique. In the late 1800s, textile specialists began using a Scandinavian word that seemed to cover it, and the English pronunciation of that word is Sprang. My first introduction happened when people at a nearby historic site asked for my help. Military reenactors needed sashes for their uniforms, and they asked me for Sprang sashes, and I said, "What's Sprang?" Sprang is best understood not as a structure, but as a method of working. If you take 3 strands and tie them at both ends, then you get this closed system. So if you work a 3-strand braid at one end, you get a mirror image of the braid at the other end. And this is what textile experts understand as Sprang. For every 1 row of work, you get 2 rows of cloth. A variety of structures lend themselves to this manner of working, and the major classes are interlinking, which looks like chain link fence, interlacing, which looks like woven cloth turned on a bias, and intertwining, where threads travel in pairs, always with the same partner, and then they meet other pairs going in the other direction. Now, there's a variety of combinations, variations on this theme, and I have developed a system to map these structures, a system for writing patterns, but that's another story. Suffice it to say, there are many structures that lend themselves to Sprang. Sprang is a manner of working, not a structure. So how exactly does it work? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to, instead of a video, I'm going to do this live demonstration here. So I've got a frame set up, and this frame has got a string that goes back and forth between the 2 ends. There are several different ways to set up a Sprang project, but I'm quite partial to a figure of 8 setup. Can you see the 8 here? And you're not going to learn how to do it from this demo. I'm just going to give you a quick understanding of the basic principle. When I slide my hand along the bottom with this figure of 8, up at the top, I've got my first cross. I'm going to manipulate the threads here at the top of the frame, pick up the thread, put it down. This is an initial setup row here, and threads are twisted in pairs at the top. At the bottom, they're also twisted. I now have a cross at the bottom of the frame. Okay, a cloth making row. I offset the pairs and I do this pick up, put down. I work a second row here, and you can see the threads are engaging as cloth at the top and also at the bottom. I'm going to put in the safety string here, and let me work 1 more row just to get things going here. Pick up, put down, pick up, put down. I work another row, and you can see we're getting cloth at the top of the frame, and we also have cloth at the bottom of the frame. 2 rows of cloth for every 1 row of work. 2 more comments about this basic structure. One, you'll notice that the stitches lean. At the top, they lean in a Z direction, and at the bottom, they lean in an S direction. We don't have 2 identical pieces. They're 2 mirror image pieces of cloth that we produce. The other thing I want to talk about this technique is that it makes a very elastic kind of textile, very stretchy this way. In this direction, you have the stability of the threads, but you can get a very comfortable, stretchy garment with this Sprang technique. Okay, I'm hearing from this side of the internet, I'm hearing a burning question in your mind. You want to know what happens at the middle. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint here, and I will show you the very next slide talks about options at the middle. We're going to go through these different options. The first one is cut apart. How does that work? Well, you're going to make two sides, the front and the back of the vest, from this one long rectangle. We've got this blue rectangle here. The loops along the bottom here will be the shoulder and neckline at the back of the vest, and these loops here at the top will be the shoulder and neckline at the front. I'm going to cut apart in the middle to separate these two pieces. I don't usually just cut all the way across at once. I will cut a few threads, tie a knot, cut a few threads, tie a knot, and this makes the fringe at the bottom of the vest. So you make the front and the back at the same time, two mirror image, reasonably identical pieces of cloth made at the same time. Another idea might be this pair of two socks. Again, a large rectangle, cut apart into two rectangles. I folded them over and gathered the loops to form the toes on one side, on each sock. I sewed up the sides, and the knots form tassels at the top. And these socks have amazing stay-up power. A third idea could be a pair of wrist warmers, two rectangles sewn over into tubes, and these were made using a variegated sock yarn. The fringes can be a decorative element. Could just as easily be a lazy pair of wrist warmers. Here I cut a hole, I left a hole when I was sewing up, and this left a hole for my thumb. The lace pattern in these gloves is inspired by a Coptic pattern I found at the Petrie Museum in London. Here, another lacy fingerless mitten, and I made a proper thumb on this one. You can't tell where I sewed up the seam because with the interlinking stitch, you can make an invisible seam. So another idea here is a mitten, and I used a denser interlacing stitch to make it more wind-proof. I made the right mitten at the same time as the left mitten. Here I incorporated a slit as I made my cloth, and that slit anticipates the separation between the thumb and the rest of the fingers. Instead of tying knots on this one, I felted. I laid a bit of wool across, and I used this fancy felting needle to felt across. So now I need to just stitch up around the thumb, and there'll be a seam here on the wrist, and then stitch around there, and you've got a pair of mittens that I made in a single afternoon. So the ideas for shaping are endless. Here is the idea for sock uppers. You make the upper for both right and left foot at the same time. Okay, I knitted the sole for these socks, but there's considerable time savings when you make the uppers two at a time. So those are the ideas for cut apart. I said there's another idea, which is insert a string. How does that work? Well, this is one of my very first pieces of Sprang. I finished it by laying a string across at the meeting place when the two sides approached each other, and then I used the tails to sew up the sides. Now this bag is full of errors. There are lots of errors in the stitches, but the errors do not hinder the function of the bag. Indeed, there are no bad stitches in Sprang. There's only different patterns. Here's another large rectangle made into a bag. When I got in the middle, I inserted a string and I pulled it tight, made a knot. The two tails sew up the sides when I folded it in half, and it formed a rectangle, a cell phone bag here. Planning ahead of time, you might notice I planned ahead making these holes here at the top and at the bottom, and that's where I put the drawstring to cinch the bag together. The ideas for Sprang are almost endless. Here we've got an interlinking stitch, an intertwining stitch, and an interlacing stitch in the same piece. Another use of this strategy is a stocking cap. I used a self-striping sock yarn, and I created a long neck rectangle. When I got to the middle, I inserted another piece of the same kind of yarn, pulled it tight, and used the tails to sew up. At one point in my explorations, I was making several of these, and it took me about one afternoon per stocking cap, much faster than I'm able to knit. Another use of that string can be seen in this Sprang shirt. The shirt was made in several panels. Ah, you say, it looks like plaid. Yes, that's one of the interlacing stitches that works with Sprang. It looks like woven cloth turned on on a bias. You have a good view of the front panel in this photo, and you can see that meeting line at the waist. The third option I mentioned earlier is a chain across, and the idea of chain across shows up in many historic pieces. Scandinavian bonnets found in peat bogs dating to the Bronze Age use this strategy, and I want to go back to my demonstration to show you exactly how this chain line works. There we go. So the chain line. I've done now several rows of Sprang, and the whole thing shortens as you go. So what I need to do is release these ends here, give me a little bit more room to work. I'm going to shorten the length of the frame. Okay, this is how the chain across works. I take a loop from the edge, twist it, and I pull the next thread through. Then I pull the next thread through that loop and another thread through that loop. And what we're getting is a chain across at the middle of the piece. And what this chain does is it seals off the cloth so it will not unravel. That's the chain across. Okay, back to the presentation. I want to show you here the idea how we make, for example, a tam. It started as a large rectangle, and when I got to the middle, I chained across. I cinched up the loops at one end, and the loops at the other end go around the face. Here's another idea, another plan for making a bonnet using the Sprang technique and the chain in the middle. Here's the chain in the middle. I sewed this into a cylinder, and I cinched the loops at both ends, made it into kind of a football shape. If you push one end inside the other, you get this double-walled hat. Really good for Winnipeg winters, where I live here. Now you notice the patterning in this hat. What this pattern is uses the lean of the stitches, S and Z, to make designs in the hat. And there's all kinds of ideas from the historic record. This is a historically accurate design. You can find patterns for this hat and for many others on my website. That chain line, one other use of the chain line, I use this a lot when I make vests. I create a vest starting at the hem, front and back, working up the front, working up the back towards the shoulders, and I often finish off with a chain line at the shoulder. Here you can see it on the table before I created the neck hole. All this has been talking about flat warp, but there's also circular warp. Suffice it to say, circular warp lets you make a cloth that's twice the length of your frame. And it begins along a meeting line, and it gives you a much more, less noticeable change one side to the other than your flat warp chain line. A use of the circular warp, for example, is circular objects such as this neck scarf. The meeting line in the middle, you can't even tell where it is in this picture, although it's front and center. The ideas for surface design are endless when you work with Sprang. And here are a couple of shawls that I made using the circular warp technique. This line of symmetry, the beginning line on both S and Z side is along here, not so noticeable. And the lace patterns in these shawls are based on historic pieces. History holds an endless supply of ideas. Lace is really a series of holes, and the secret, once you know the secret to making the hole, then it's a matter of planning. Plan the work, work the plan to make these lovely lace patterns. The circular warp idea was key to understanding these military sashes that introduced me to Sprang. Famous people who owned Sprang sashes include Peter the Great, George Washington, and Napoleon's generals. Come to find out, most European military officers wore Sprang sashes, starting, hard to say, 1600s and on into the 1800s. As long as they were using military uniforms, they seemed to have Sprang sashes. Sprang was apparently a commonly known way to make a long, narrow strip of cloth. That is the sash. Now, I want to wrap up by talking about some ways that I have explored for making Sprang shirts. I've worked this several different ways, and I want to talk you through some of them. This is a shirt. It was a replica of a 700-year-old shirt. It began as a large, flat warp. I began at the neckline, front and back, and worked down towards the hem. The fringes are the hem where the two pieces were cut apart. Yes, this is the same strategy as that strategy I showed you, the little vest for my neighbor's granddaughter at the beginning of the show. And this is the way this Arizona openwork shirt was made, starting at the shoulders, working down. Another way to work is that you can start at the hem and you can work upwards. So these are vests made that way, working towards the neckline. And generally, I use a chain line along the shoulders to secure the cloth. I've explored diverse ways to create neck openings and ways to make collars and sleeves. The historic record, again, I use the historic pieces for ideas in these surface designs. And here is a vest that uses a circular warp. Circular warp goes well with a multicolored skein of yarn. Work began at the neckline, and I worked from the neckline down front and back towards the hem. At the hem, I cut the circuit apart and made little knots. I covered the knots with a modified I cord at the hem. Yes, I've explored ways to make sleeves, 2 at a time, including the shaping of the sleeve cap. And at the right is a hole that I cut for a neckline. Now, some people get really nervous when I talk about cutting into my cloth. So I've also explored ways to assemble a shirt without cutting. And this is a Sprang shirt made from 9 pieces of Sprang. Okay, you only see 3 pieces at the left, but I make each piece to the shape that I need and then assemble them into a shirt. Yes, this neck, the piece around the neck, the collar is a piece of circular warp. Sprang is an incredibly versatile technique. And this is only a small sampling of what all you can do. My COVID project, grounded here in Winnipeg, I've been going through my photo collection on my computer as well as books, and I've been writing out Sprang lace patterns, adding to the book that I published in 2016. I hope you're now interested in Sprang because it's just such an amazing technique. For more information, you might check out my books and my DVD. They're available on the Taproot video site. This week on the HGA website under specials, sales, and promotions, you'll find a code for a discount on my books on the Taproot site, and you might also check out my website, spranglady.com. You see, Sprang is such an amazing technique. It should be as well known as knit and crochet and hand weaving, and I thank you for your interest. I hope that you will now help me spread the good word about Sprang. All right, off to you.
Thank you, Carol. What a lovely presentation on Sprang.
Was that under my 15 minutes? Hope I didn't go over.
Next up, we have Brecia talking about her Woven Women's Voices project. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm here in Santa Barbara, California, and I've set up the Women's Woven Voices tapestry here in my tiny living room to share with you today. Thank you to HGA for this opportunity. And Carol, wowza, I didn't know anything about Sprang. That was amazing. So, the Women's Woven Voices project is a collaborative art project. It's an international project, as a matter of fact. Here in the tapestry, we have woven story cloths from across the United States, from Canada, from Bulgaria, from Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, and Australia. So what is this? So the mission of this project really is to support women's empoweredness by self-reflection and writing, weaving, and sharing their personal stories so that we foster a culture of self-knowledge and courage so that women can use their voices to make changes that are positive in themselves and in their communities. Project was conceived in 2017 when I had the honor of being on a team of women who presented an international women's conference. And we invited 6 women from the community who were doing something very shiny and inspiring and positive. And we said, come to the conference and tell us your story. Knowing that, you know, stories are powerful in themselves. So at the end of the day, after the 6 women had spoken, the 6th speaker summed up the theme for the day, because 5 out of those 6 women talked about being sexually abused as children. And the final speaker asked the 300 women in the room if they had experienced any kind of abuse, if they wanted to, if they would stand up. And at that moment, when the whole room just sort of rose to its feet, I realized that I wanted my art life to add positive energy to creating a world that was not full of gender violence, but that where there was mutual respect, active listening, open communication, and compassion for women and for girls and for men and for boys. And so I had the idea that I wanted to express that through art, to bring that awareness into the world through art. And I wanted it to go big. So my goal is to have 1,000 people from around the world go through the process of reflecting on their lives, what their strengths are, what their challenges have been, and weave their story cloth. So what you're seeing behind me so far, there's over 200 story cloths. And what I think I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to give you a little up close look here while I share a little bit of the next part. So there's 2 points of impact for the project. One is the participant, as they are reflecting and writing. I'm really a big journal person. So I think that just by taking the time to write out our life experiences, we have an opportunity to do reflection and introspection and possibly achieve new perspectives on our life. And then the weaving, of course, gives us that physical experience of actually making a physical representation of our life. And I just invite people to do that however they want. Some people will choose to do a storyline. For example, each one of the colors in their weaving represents something in their life. Others just weave colors that they enjoy. Many people have said that the process has really been healing for them. It's given them an opportunity to do some reframing. And I'll tell you a little story. One of the participants is an 84-year-old woman, and she had been in an abusive relationship. And when she participated in the project, she wove her story cloth. And when she finished, she said, while I was weaving, I was thinking about the ups and downs of my life and the different things that I'd experienced. And when I finished that last bit of weaving, I realized I am a strong woman. And she said, Brecia, I have never actually thought those words before. So I'm hoping that by participating, the participants will have an experience that's positive for them. And then each one of those story cloths is stitched together into the tapestry. And I hope that you see the beauty and the diversity and the strength and just the incredible power in the community of all these stories joined together. As the artist of the project, or the founder of the project, I actually add a red fringe to the bottom of the tapestry to just call attention and create a conversation awareness about the issues that women are experiencing globally that include things like domestic violence, sexual abuse, and human trafficking. Now, when you see the tapestry, there's every possible moment in women's lives that's being represented from every life experience, their insights, their hopes, their courage, their joy, their loves, their children, their spouses, their parents, their marriages, their military service, their health, their finances. And so even though it's not a representational story, it's an abstract story that combined together. One of the women who was in a recent workshop, I'm gonna switch you over here too so you can see these a little bit better. We had a workshop with women who are newly to the United States from Iran, Iraq, and Syria and Afghanistan. And one of the women said when she finished her weaving, she had included represented her family and her hopes and dreams for her daughters, now living in the United States and having escaped very traumatic experiences back in the Middle East. She said, when I finished my weaving, I thought, wow, this is really wonderful. But she said, when she saw it stitched into the tapestry with all of the other hundreds of stories, she just said it just felt very overwhelmingly beautiful. So where does this tapestry go? The tapestry has been traveling since it was just one small panel. It showed up at HGA's Convergence in Reno. It was at that point, I think maybe only 45 people had participated. Since then, I've continued to have workshops and get the word out and to expand the project so that now, as I said, there's over 200. The tapestry has been at universities, it's been at museums, it's been at schools, it's been at community events, it's been at, I already said museums. I was going to say it's been at museums, and it's scheduled to go over the next couple of years to women's conferences across the United States. So I'm just happy to be able to share the project. The website for Women's Woven Voices is womenswovenvoices.com, and you can go there and order a free loom kit. The loom kit is just strings and a straw, very simple weaving method. One of the delightful things about this project is that I have been able to introduce weaving to so many people who have never woven cloth before in their life. I would say the majority of people who have participated. You just put the straws together to create this little hand loom. This might look really familiar to y'all. It's very simple. I did this with children for years, and I knew that it would be a very simple and very economical way for many people to participate. I also want to share that the project is really, it really is to call attention to women's issues in the world, but we are only half of the population, and people have always asked, can men participate? And they've always been invited to participate, but just recently I've launched a new phase of the project where I'm intentionally inviting men who want to join the conversation about mutual respect and having a world where there is no gender violence, that people do respect each other and treat each other with compassion. So if you have friends, family, coworkers, women, men, boys and girls who you think would like to participate in the project, please feel free to share. This week during the National Spinning and Weaving Week, you can order a free loom kit and I will also ship it for free. So that's it. I'm going to just give you a quick view of the tapestry over on the other side. And you'll notice that people embellish the tapestry with all different kinds of things that represent their lives. And the weaving includes, it's mostly yarn, but it's also fabric, string, leather, hair, rickrack, plastic, any weaving materials that you think would tell your story. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brecia. What a wonderful project. We really appreciate you joining us today. Our final thread talk for this hour is Susan Lazear, and she is presenting on planning clothing with hand-woven fabric or hand-spun yarn. Take it away, Susan.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen, and I just need you to confirm you see PowerPoint, do you?
Yes, we see your PowerPoint.
All right, great. All right, so let me just get into, here we go. And I had to take an hour lecture down to 15 minutes, so I'm going to be whipping through this. So welcome, everyone. Thank you, HGA, for the opportunity, and I'm honored to be with the group of speakers today. So my topic is taking hand woven and or hand spun yarn and figuring out what to do garment wise. And so this is going to talk about some of the considerations. But basically, the principle that we need to keep in mind is, most likely your fiber, yarn, or fabric is the focus. So we generally want to keep the silhouette simple. So fabrication is a combination of many things: the fiber, the yarn, the structure, which can be all sorts of things. And really, you as the creator have the control. So sometimes it helps to know where you're heading as you plan your fabrication. Here are two very complicated structures, and you can see that therefore the yarn is kept simple. The same with like hand spun. If you're going to have a hand spun yarn or a complicated knit structure in case you're knitting, you just don't want two things competing with the other. So let's look at some things we need to consider. First is hand and drape. These are two pieces of hand woven fabric. This one on the left is from Robin Spady, and it's got a beautiful drape, and the one on the right doesn't drape as much. So I would make two completely different garments from these, and I often put the fabric to a form and move it around to get the sense of fit and drape. These are some garments that I've created. I'm a mixed media artist. I do all sorts of things. The one on the left is a hand knit with a novelty yarn, and therefore I kept the silhouette fairly simple and the amount of ease very simple. This is a garment I made with hand wovens. It's the same warp, but the weft was changed every 2 yards. And therefore, as was the tightness of the weave, I could make one garment from that piece of long fabric, and I knew what parts worked together. But the shawl drape collar here is quite drapey, so I treat each part differently. The item on the right is machine knit with a novelty boucle yarn, but incredibly fine, and a loose gauge, so I had lots of drape. You have to decide what the focus is for your fabric or yarn. Is it the color, which might happen in the case of hand spun that's been dyed? Is it the motif or the overall repeat? Is there a stripe? Is it texture? What is it about your fabric that you would consider to be the most important thing? And that should lead your path. Other thoughts would be, how wide is my fabric in the case of hand woving? And because you may have to plan your pattern accordingly because you're restricted by a width. You also consider bias, and you also consider how it needs to be handled in the process. It's not a crime, okay, I'm not a purist. This is fusible interfacing, which you can buy 60 inches wide. If you need more stability to your fabric, it is, in my opinion, not a crime to fuse it to a lightweight knit fusible interfacing. It will stabilize your fabric. The knit doesn't change the hand that much. It might help balance weights, but there are times when you need to add support to, in particular, a hand-woven fabric so that it doesn't pull away, especially if it's loosely woven. So inspiration, I love designing. It's my favorite part of everything, but we have lots of sources for inspiration, but Pinterest is my go-to. And this is my board, Think, Doodle, Make. I have 3 different entities on Pinterest, but if you find this one, usually when I'm preparing a lecture, I make a board. So you'll find lots of things, and according to what lectures I've done lately. But here's hand woven and hand spun. So feel free to come visit the board where I've pinned things, some of the things you'll see in this one. I take lots of photos of store windows, of garments, especially if I'm working on a project or thinking ahead. One of my favorite go-to mail order catalogs and websites is Artful Home. They feature wearable artists a lot so that you can see garments. I often pick up tips from pictures in store windows, like this looks like hand woven, but I love the fact that they used another fabric and it peeps through, on the belt, on the cuff, in the facing. So not only did it stabilize, but it became a design feature. I follow trends and I collect pictures from magazines. Sometimes I pull out every garment in my closet that's related to the project in hand. I may speak to this later. This is Robin Spady, a hand weaver. We were a team in Convergence 2010 for the fashion show. I think you should consider mixing mediums, especially if you do more than one. It helps stretch your hand woven or hand spun further. can speed the process up, so you can combine, you know, in many, many different ways. These are some images from my students when I taught at Convergence in Long Beach. We called it Project Conversion, Project Convergence. It was based under Project Runway. They brought their handwovens, but then we went to Mood Fabrics and picked up additional fabrics that could work in planning an ensemble or their garment. These are some mixed medias that I have done. This is hand-dyed, shibori dyed yarn that I added to a commercial fabric, a knit. This is mixed media with hand knitting and then a commercial fabric skirt applied. This is a hand-woven fabric that I bought in Paris from a company called Malia Kent, and she was one of the original weavers for Coco Chanel, and I suspect that the company still weaves for Chanel today. I combined that hand-woven fabric with a hand knit, with plain knitting, and also with a novelty yarn, mimicking some of the things I saw down in the handwoven. These are some other mixed media projects I've done. I have mixed cotton velveteen with what looks like handwoven, but it's actually it's a knitting technique called knit weave. This is handwoven fabric here that I mixed with a linen fabric, and there's a panel on the back. This is a hand knit sleeve put into Berber fleece. So it's really fun to do mixed media, and it stretches whatever your primary structure is further. So the things you should consider are the style of your garment, the body and the art of illusion that you want to create. Make sure you understand if it's for you, how you like your clothes to fit, or maybe how your customers like their clothes to fit. Because you only get one chance once you've cut into the woven fabric. And knitting you can tear out if you're using Handspun to knit with. But in woven, you know, you get one chance. You got to know where you're heading. And I think I'm a big person. I'm really learning about things about the measurements you should have in your patterns to have success. And ease is a big part of it. So I call it understanding your fit preference. How much ease do you like in your clothes? And honestly, your closet is one of your best candidates for helping you learn this information. You know, how deep do you like the armholes on your clothes? What is your favorite neckline width? Your favorite length? What kind of silhouette do you like? This is how I calculate ease. I just simply pinch it out, usually at my bust and at the waist, to determine in a particular style with a particular hand and drape, how much ease do I like? And I pay attention and I record it. These are a couple measuring tools that I use to help me if I'm measuring off clothing that I like or measuring my body. This is a tape by Lorraine Henry. What's unique about it is it has a 0 in the middle. So if you're needing to take a front bust versus back, it makes it super easy. This is a ruler that that comes from Germany, and I really love the concept of it because not only can I measure my neckline width, my armhole depth easily, I can also measure off parts of garments where I want to mimic that style. This is a fitting chart that I've put together, and if you, at the end, I'll try to paste this in for you. I have it on my website that you can go grab this chart and download it and go to your closet and learn some things about the clothes. And then when you make patterns, you are narrowing down the chance of error. I am doing a thread talk on Friday on about key measurements that you should know about your body in order to have better success in the clothing that you make. So you can check that out if you're interested. So in planning the garment, think ahead, keep it simple. Do pay attention to drape. I can't emphasize that enough, and I'm just going to jump into pattern software here. I just want to show you, so if I'm designing a pattern, and I'm going to put a grid on because you can see how much ease is between the body. The green is the body of the person, and the yellow is the pattern here. And so if I'm going to do a pattern for a garment that has a lot of drape, I'm making this wider right now. And so it's fine for this to be more fluid and the sleeve just updated. But on the other hand, if it's a stiffer structure and a stiffer fabric, I will minimize my ease to maybe have a 1-inch pinch, which is 4 inches around the person. And that way, I have a better chance of success. Usually now we're at the point where you've kind of done some thinking and planning ease and, you know, etc. Now you need to start sketching, doodling, drawing, collecting images. And I usually start with some kind of sketch. I either do it by hand. It doesn't look great because I'm not a great hand drawer, or I'll do it by computer. It doesn't matter. You're just getting an idea down. Then it comes to creating your pattern. You have options. You can use a commercial sewing pattern or combine a couple patterns. You can create your own, or you can copy a garment that you have and that you like because of its style and fit. And you know, it's not that difficult to copy garment, especially when you can take measurements and know I need a neckline this wide and a neckline this deep, and the armhole should be like this, etc. So these are some sample patterns I'm going to show you that I think would work well for hand wovens. I am doing a couple of demos in the vendor area, one on Tuesday and one on Saturday. If you want to learn more about it, come see. I get my ideas from all sorts of places. I think this top, even though this is a knit top, would be great for hand woven fabric with some drape. And so again, this is Artful Home. So I have, you know, kind of calculated out in terms of measurements what I think that garment would be. Here is one that is like a high-low, and this is the front. And so I've reworked the design. And in this case, I gave the software a gauge, so it would tell me how to knit the garment. So I could knit a version of this. These are funnel neck jackets or tops that I think would be particularly fun for hand woven. This is a garment that I saw at Anthropology on their website, and I just love the collars, and it's raglan sleeves. So I think this would be a great design. You can see it almost looks like a hand woven fabric. This is a combination of hand knit and fabric. We saw that one earlier. Here's another one. I'm actually going to block print the bottom on this, and the top, I'm not sure, but I just love the idea of this band. This is Artful Home as well. I like the circular pocket, you know, so you're looking at elements. Okay, on to prototyping. When you're working with hand woven in particular, you don't get a second chance short of having to weave the fabric again. So you want to make sure maybe you should prototype. And there's many ways to prototype. You're going to see that I often print out small versions of my paper patterns to see how the proportions work. And sometimes I'll print out a full scale or take a full scale pattern, and I'm planning ahead. And if we have time, I'll show you this whole project. This was the Convergence project, but we were kind of planning ahead using a paper pattern template to sort of sort out where we were heading. Sometimes I prototype in quarter scale. We have these little plastic dolls that we create that are quarter scale size 10. And so I'll print out the pattern in quarter scale, or I'll just start draping fabric onto it to sort of come up with my own version of a drape style. Here is the quarter scale version of what became this top here in this mixed media ensemble that I put together, but I could see that the proportions work, etc. Half scale, you can buy half scale dress forms. And if I'm embarking on something, and this is the skirt I did for the Convergence project, and it was complex, and I wasn't even sure how to sew it together. So by printing out a half scale version and going to this little half scale form, I learned, okay, you got to change this, but I also figured out how to sew it together before it became important on a hand woven fabric. This was the finished skirt. So you can see it was complex. You know, it had things wrapping around. It was playing with stripes. It had godets. I utilized fringe, you know, etc. Full scale too, you can easily create a garment sample in full scale. And if you're lucky, you might get 2 garments. So for this particular project, I made a full scale version in polar fleece, a type of polar fleece here, because its hand and drape was similar to what I anticipated the lined jacket to be. So here you can see there was my pattern. I printed out, I learned some things about the collar in the full scale test and then changed it before I headed into the final fabric. In cutting and sewing, pay attention to your fabric. In this case, I had stripes. So I really had to plan my layout and how I wanted things to match up when I was doing it. A lot of people are afraid of cutting hand woven. Don't be afraid. I mean, you can always quickly sew around the outside edge just to stabilize it or serge your fabric right away. Speaking of that, so you can stay stitch curved areas in particular to sew. You can test your serger on a scrap take some scrap fabrics and do a lot of your hand woven and do a lot of tests, experiment with differential feed. Also, take the time to get to know your serger. It has a lot to offer you. Certain fabrics just speak to wanting to have fringe. And so I did do a lot of fringe. What I did was zigzag in X many inches from the edge, and then I pulled out in sections, the weft, so that I was left with the fringe. But fringe can speak to a lot. You can do traditional hems. You can bind edges. It's sort of like a stretch and sew technique. I use it a lot to bind an edge on any kind of different fabric. You can trim and you can embellish. This is a piping, but it's a flat piping. So I use this on a garment. There's no cording in it, but I used a contrasting fabric that I use consistently throughout the garment. These are appliques put onto the base as well. So in whatever time I have left, I'm going to run through just one project quickly, the whole process. I did this with Robin Spady from the Seattle area. Here we are brainstorming. I pulled up clothes, as you saw. We looked at Robin's strengths in what she is strong in weaving, which was inlay and weaving velvet. So we wanted that to be a focus. We pulled images of inspiration, and I drafted the first round, and you can see it did change by the end of it. Email back and forth between Seattle and San Diego. Then I started calculating measurements by looking at the images that I was using as inspiration. How wide do I think that neck is? Drafted a pattern, figured out my ease, figured out my length. There's the collar. I did the prototype, but we also did some planning. Here's the garment in process. And I did the top with, I sublimated the skeins of yarn. We were supposed to use every skein of yarn, but there was a couple we didn't use. So I photographed them, sublimated them onto a polyester mesh, and then did hand felting in given areas of the fabric. So this was the felting day. So here's the finished garment ensemble. We made a hat, or had a hat done and hand woven. You can see the top and everything as it pulled together. There's enough fabric left to do a little bit of a purse and embellish. And so this was it. If you have any questions, you can email me, susan@cochineal.com. And that's my website. And always just feel free to email me if you have questions. And that's it. So we have a chat window, right? So I think what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Susan. That was a wonderful presentation on
great.
planning clothing for hand-woven fabric. And what we're going to encourage you to do is to reach out to Susan with any questions you have. And as Susan mentioned, she's going to be featured a couple more times throughout our Spinning and Weaving Week events, and we look forward to having her back. And thank you all again for attending our first hour of Thread Talks. Our next event on the schedule is a 4 p.m. studio tour with John Marshall. We'll see you all there. And for the full schedule, please visit our website, www.weavespindye.org. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.